Welcome to Khetz Tutorials, and in this video I'll be talking about standard deviation with grouped data. So now what do I mean when I talk about grouped data? So now let's say we had a bunch of ones. After sorting data, then we had a bunch of twos, then 7, then a bunch of 8s, and so on. So we can group these. We can see that we have 3 ones, we have 4 twos, 1 7, and so on. Instead of having all of this, or instead of putting this as our input into the calculator, we can actually count them, or if they're already counted, we can have a table where we have the data and the frequency. And the frequency is a description of how many of these we have, right? So you can have 1, then remember that we had 3 of these, 2, then 4, those 7, there was only 1, and we had a bunch of 8s, and so on. This is quite useful because we've actually avoided having a long list of numbers. We just know the frequency. We know we have 3 ones from this, and we can find anything that we want to find, the mean, the standard deviation, any of the variables we have been talking about thus far. So the way that you do that is you can do this directly on your calculator. So you know how to, from the previous video, if you haven't watched that, just go back to that, but it's fine if you haven't, but I do advise that you go back to that for an added explanation of how you can add this column on your calculator. But now we also want to add this frequency column, right? So that is what we're going to do in this video. So let's get right into it. So to add the frequency column into your data set, you press setup, which is on your calculator, and to access that, it's the same button as mode. So you basically press shift then mode. That would get you into the setup of your calculator. Then now you scroll down until you can see an option which says stat, and just press the number which is associated with that option on your calculator. Then it will ask frequency. Then there are 2 options, on or off. We want a frequency to be on so that we can have this column over there, and you'd pick the option which is option 1 on my calculator, and that is for on. And now that you have your frequency, you can now go back to the steps that we discussed to enter your points. So now if you press mode, now you're just pressing mode without shift, then it should bring up a few options, and you press stat, which is option 3 on my calculator. You then press option 1 for one variable. Then you'd enter, or you'd input all your values into the calculator. So you'd put in the values, then after putting the values, you'd put your frequency. Then after doing that, you basically have all of your values in the calculator. You have the values and their associated frequency. So you can now follow the same steps that you used in the previous video, and we can just do that quickly in this video as well. So now that the values are in the calculator, you're going to press a C. So after entering the data points as well as the frequency of each of the points, you're going to press AC. That will give you a 0 on the calculator. Now pressing shift 1, and now that would pop up a menu, and you then pick VAR. And from that list of options, you can now choose whatever you're looking for. Now, if you're looking for the mean, you go for option 2. It's option 2 on my calculator, and you press the equal sign. That would give you the mean over here. So just as a practice run, I advise that you follow through and you do this yourself. And these are the answers that you expect for your mean. That is the mean over there. And to find your standard deviation from, you just press shift 1, then go for VAR, and then now choose the option which is associated with the standard deviation, and this is the answer that you expect to find. So that is it with regards to group data. You just add a frequency column to basically count the number of times that a specific data point appears, and you do the exact same points that we discussed in the previous video. And now I just want to add on something which is quite interesting. or a common question which is usually asked: what happens to the data if we add or subtract a value to the data? And we can do this with a simple example, or we can actually look at a simple example. So if I have points 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, these are 5 data points, and they're literally 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now, what is the mean of this data? We want to investigate the effect of adding or subtracting something. So the mean is 3, and now we want to check what the standard deviation is of this data. And to do that, it's quite simple. Using what we talked about on the calculator, you can quickly find the standard deviation after inputting all of these points. And the standard deviation that you expect to find with these points is the following: 1.41. Okay, so this is what we have with the original data. Now, what happens if we add 1 to each of these points? So if we add 1 to all of the points, we now have 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now let's find the mean. So let's find the mean again. What would be the mean of this data? Now you can just simply put your values into the calculator and now see that the mean becomes 4. So the mean has increased after we increased. So we added 1 to each of the points and the mean has now gone up. But what about the standard deviation? What actually happens to the standard deviation? That is something that we should investigate. And that is what I wanted to talk about in this portion of the video. What happens when we add or when we subtract certain values to all of the data points? So the changes actually affect all of the data points as we added everything. So the standard deviation is 1.41, which is exactly the same. So this is an interesting discovery. If you add the same value or if you subtract the same value from all of the points, you expect to have the same standard deviation. But the mean will follow whether you added or you subtracted. And we can actually check that out. What if we subtract 1 from all of the points? You should have 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And now if you want to find the mean of the data points, now you have 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now let's go for the mean of the data points. Now if you find the mean, you should get a value of 2 as your mean. Now let's check the standard deviation. If you find the standard deviation of this data, you now have 1.41, which is exactly the same. So if you add or subtract any value, as long as it affects everything. So if you subtract the same value from all of your data points, or if you add a certain value to all of the data points, the standard deviation doesn't change, but the mean follows whether you added or you subtracted. So if a question comes and it says, what happens to the standard deviation if we add a certain value to all of the data points? You just have to say it doesn't change. So the standard deviation doesn't change, but what happens to the mean if we add a certain value to all of the data points? It actually follows suit. So if you subtract, it decreases, and if you add a value to all of the data points, it increases. So that is all that I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about the standard deviation when we're dealing with group data, as well as the behavior of your variables when you add or subtract values. So I hope this was of value to you. I hope you learned something in the video. I hope this will be useful to you to study and prepare for whatever you're preparing for. And if you like the video, just give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. And I'd really appreciate it if you'd share the video or the channel with your friends. And that is it from me. I will see you in the next video.